Chess Diagnostic.
Hello everybody, this is a game round 5 on the Grenke Chess Classic between Magnus Carlsen and Georg Meier, it looks like. So this game is a gruenfeld defense, and it's interesting because it involves simple tactics that led to Magnus Carlsen's first win in this chess tournament. It starts off with d4, Magnus Carlsen's black, and Meier is white. So d4, knight to f6, and with g6 we get a gruenfeld defense. Develops his knight, and then with bishop to g7 we actually get the 3 knights variation of the gruenfeld defense. So Magnus Carlsen takes the pawn, and after a queen check, instead of the normal move of knight to c6, he brings his knight back to reroute it to g6 when the queen takes. So after he threatens the queen retreats, he castles, and then he starts developing the rest of his minor pieces. So he hits the queen with a tempo. Now he could play e4, but with bishop to g4, he'd put pressure on this d4 pawn. And actually he can do it either way. So after the queen retreats, he still plays bishop to g4. And after bishop to g2, he takes and wins the pawn. Now the bishop can take here, but actually this pawn d4 is worth a lot more because it's in the center. So even though white was able to win back his pawn, this d4 pawn is worth a lot more. So the computer's reading an evaluation of -1, and that is primarily because of the strong activity of black's pieces, especially his knights that are far forward, these 2 knights here. So black hits the bishop because the bishop was threatening the rook, and white starts a counterattack instead of retreating the bishop and losing a pawn, and he has to trade one of his bishops. But now, of course, these 2 pawns are quite weak, and with the rook having an open file, it'll be a lot easier for him to attack. So with c5, he cements the knight on d4 in the center. And now notice that white can't win the knight. It may look like it's pinned, but he actually has a check here. So he'll be able to get out of it with that. So white doesn't make the mistake of trying to attack a pinned piece, and he castles. And as soon as he castles, Magnus starts attacking the weak pawns. So it looks like white is trying to weaken black's kingside with a bishop trade, but there's really nothing he can do at this point to prevent the loss of a pawn. So the rook was hitting this knight, and now he loses another pawn with that check. So the knight is now pinned, and after the pawn protects it, he actually sacrifices the exchange, but he's up 2 pawns, 3 pawns, and a knight, which is plenty of material, especially with the knight's ability to usher in these passed pawns. So white tries to go for a queen trade, but of course Magnus is having none of it. Now notice that if the queen takes this pawn, the game's all over very quickly, and then the queen is forced to take. So that's clearly losing. So it's these simple tactics that are present in a lot of the game. Oh, we'll go back here. Alright, so the queen trade, the queen comes back, and these central pawns with this strong knight is actually equal or stronger than a rook. If you can post your knight on an outpost in the center, especially in the opponent's territory, and he can't drive it away, then the evaluation can change just on that knight. White's attacking the e5 pawn. Black defends it. White goes for another queen trade. Of course, Black doesn't want to trade queens. He wants to keep his attack going. So Black is actually preparing that if they do have a queen trade, his king and his pieces and pawns will be in the best position to push forward and probably force White to sacrifice the exchange back or just lose a rook for a pawn. So he pushes c4, already pushing his passed pawns forward. Now White is weakening his king side, trying to keep Black out, but it's kind of futile because Black is going to be entering anyway. Notice how Magnus Carlsen has repositioned his queen and his rook to be as active as possible. White is just helpless and left to move his king back and forth, and there's no way to make progress. So Black at this point is trying to break through, and he just keeps increasing his activity. Now, of course, the queen can't take because of this simple tactic. The rook would take, and then it's all over. So these simple tactics Magnus uses to increase his activity and possibly trick his opponent, but his opponent's a 2600 Grandmaster, so that's most likely not happening, although it does happen at the end. Alright, so he plays, we'll go back and move here. So after rook to f6, White makes a mistake and plays king to d2. He should have played rook to d2, rook to e2, and actually gave up the exchange here, although Black has too much pressure at this point in this line, and he's just lost too many pawns. So Black is forcing the queen back, but now, alright, so after rook to f4, if you want to pause and figure out what Black will do after a queen trade here, why this is a mistake. So obviously you can see that these simple tactics were present. If we go back here, these simple tactics were present, and Magnus kept using them to put pressure on his opponent, such as when he brought his rook to f6. Now the queen can't take the pawn, and then if we keep going forward with rook to f4, White finally cracks and takes the pawn with a check. But there's a critical error in White taking that pawn. After a queen trade, there's actually a knight fork, and a 2600 Grandmaster missed the final knight fork, winning rook and forking the rook and the king, and being up way too much material for White to have any hope at all. So it's quite interesting that the evaluation changed so much from such simple tactics. But that's what happens when you slowly and methodically increase your activity and just make simple threats and put pressure on your opponent. It's amazing, it's always amazing to me how far that can get you in games like this. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this analysis. I know it wasn't perfect, but I tried to make a good summary of the main points. If you have any questions about this game, just leave it in the comments. I'll see you in the future.